This week, 9 years ago, the shocking persecution of Myanmar's Rohingya began, and an exodus ensued. Unwelcomed by Bangladeshi authorities, while Myanmar still stands accused of genocide, close to 1 million remain stateless in temporary camps. After almost a decade, have the Rohingya been forgotten? I'm Andrea Sankey, and today's newsmaker is the Rohingya. As humanitarian crises tend to do, the images of hundreds of thousands of Rohingya refugees fleeing Myanmar 9 years ago sparked outrage around the world. Eventually, their plight would land at the International Court of Justice, where Myanmar's government stands accused of genocide. Though still awaiting an actual verdict, the court did instruct Myanmar to actively prevent acts of genocide. But since then, nothing has happened. Hundreds of thousands of people continue languishing in Bangladeshi refugee camps, unwanted by authorities there. And with Myanmar now entrenched in civil war, the Rohingya continue without the option of safely returning home. So has the world's largest stateless population been forgotten? And for how long can their plight persist? Here's a look.
9 years ago, Rohingya Muslims from Myanmar's Arakan state were forced to flee for their lives to neighbouring Bangladesh. They escaped violence at the hands of Myanmar's soldiers, who carried out what the UN Human Rights Chief labelled a textbook example of ethnic cleansing in 2017. Cox's Bazar, once a sleepy fishing village in southern Bangladesh, swelled as around 750,000 Rohingya refugees arrived, eventually becoming the world's largest refugee camp. But now, Rohingya are on the march, seeking to be heard, seeking justice, seeking better conditions, and a way to return home.
There is no justice within 9 years. Justice delay is justice denied. So we are calling international community and international leaders. We have to go to our homeland as soon as possible.
More than 1.2 million Rohingya refugees now live in about 30 camps in Cox's Bazar. Many of them face worsening hunger, safety fears, and uncertainty about their future. Up to half the camp's residents are children. But many Rohingya say they want to return to their homes, in spite of the dangers of the civil war.
This is not our country, but we are grateful to Bangladesh for granting us refuge. But here, we cannot pursue our dreams. If I had been in our country, I could have gained an education, obtained a degree, and made a livelihood.
But Myanmar is in no position to accommodate returnees. 5 years ago, the military took control of Myanmar and ousted its civilian government. It also forcefully conscripted around 125,000 people, many of them Rohingya. A UN report released on Tuesday suggested the military's persistent quest for control and legitimacy has only worsened suffering and humanitarian conditions for civilians in Myanmar. It is believed that around 100,000 people have been killed in the last 5 years on all sides as the military battles pro-democracy forces and ethnic minority rebel armies. Earlier in August, Myanmar's military-backed government began talking about bringing refugees home from Bangladesh. It had said that around 308,000 of the 820,000 names submitted by Bangladesh had been verified. But it would not be possible to repatriate them until security conditions improved in the civil war-stricken Rakhine state. But the rebel Arakan army is now the de facto leadership of much of Rakhine state, not Myanmar's military. And according to the UN report, the Arakan rebel army has seized land, subjected the Rohingya to detention camps, restricted their movements, and has arbitrarily killed and tortured many. the Rohingya don't have Myanmar citizenship, and the military is also who the Rohingya fled from in the first place 9 years ago. Nevertheless, Rohingya refugees recognise that a life of uncertainty is unsustainable. But after 9 years, little progress has been made, and the Rohingya don't want to be forgotten.
Well, joining me now to look further at the state of the world's largest stateless population 9 years after they fled Myanmar are Rohingya politician and former Deputy Human Rights Minister of Myanmar's exiled National Unity Government, Aung Kyaw Moe, from Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh, Rohingya human rights advocate and founder of Refugee Women for Peace and Justice, Lucky Karim, and from Boston, director of the Asia Human Rights and Labor Advocates, Phil Robertson. Thanks all so much for being with me. Lucky, you spent 6 years in the Bangladeshi camps before you were resettled in the United States almost 4 years ago, if I'm not mistaken, but you've obviously been back to visit multiple times as you're there right now. Describe what it's been like for you and how you feel about the progress, I put that in quotations, or lack thereof, made over the last 9 years.
Thanks for having me. As I mentioned, I am joining from Cox's Bazar. This is my fourth return since I was resettled to the United States back in 2022. I decided to spend the day of 25th August with the community members in the camps, just to feel the pain, to really speak to people who have been waiting on these tiny shelters for the last 9 years. And my main goal is to be able to carry the message of the people from the camps all the way to the global stage, to be able to deliver those messages to the right people at the right time. I spoke to hundreds of people over the last couple of weeks during my trip to Cox's Bazar. I have met with hundreds of women, civil society leaders, community members, community leaders. What they're telling me is they're on a survival mode. It's just an emotional week for me personally and my community, and especially the day of 25th August. People wake up. It is a day that we all recall and look back to Burma and think about what we've lost during the genocide in 2017. Reflection, talking to neighbors, community members, and family members, but also at the same time looking forward. What could be done and what should be done to make sure we do not mark another genocide anniversary next year around this time.
Well, we'll talk
what
about
people have been telling me is they're on a survival mode. All they worry about in the camp is before they go to bed, they worry about their safety and security. They worry if they will be floating, for example, if there will be landslide, for example, winds, for example, rain, fire. And when they wake up in the morning, all they worry about is there are 3 meals in a day. Will they be fed? Will they have food? So that's all they worry about because they're on a survival mode. And it is a stop for them.
Yeah,
it is a refugee camp for them. It's not a life for them. And it's not a home for them. But also at the same time, keeping their hopes alive for a safe return back to their homes when it is safe to do so.
Lucky,
And
I'm not sure if you
people
can
have been
hear
asking me
me,
thousands of questions. Yeah.
Okay. Before you go any further, I do want to talk about, the future and where everything might be a year from now. But let me turn to Aung Kyaw Moe, because survival mode after 9 years, it doesn't sound good enough. So Aung Kyaw Moe, has anything improved for the Rohingya since the exodus began? And do you feel, in essence, the Rohingya have become a forgotten people?
Thank you for having me. I don't think that the Rohingya crisis has been forgotten. Rather, the Rohingya are being remembered reactively, but not in a consistent political manner. The 2017 crisis has generated enormous international attentions, but 9 years later, the Rohingya crisis has become one of the protracted crises. The international attentions often rises when there is a new emergency or another displacement, violence in Rakhine State, or funding crisis, as such things. The deeper problem here is that the world has not adequately addressed the root cause, denial of the identity, meaningful inclusions in the process that will determine the future of the Rohingya. The discriminations that's systematic, lack of citizenship, the cycle of impunity against for the crimes that being committed against the Rohingya, and the absence of credible political arrangement that would allow them to live safely, adequately in Myanmar. So I would say that Rohingya are not completely forgotten, but they have been insufficiently prioritized, and humanitarian attentions remain
Okay.
to somewhat level. But there it need to be much more comprehensive political will collectively by the international community to address the root cause so that the Rohingya can go back to the place of origin with the safety, dignity, with their own will, and live peacefully with other community in Myanmar.
Okay, Phil, 9 years later, you tell us what hasn't been done or what hasn't happened to, at the very least, improve the lives of these almost 1 million people. And beyond that, I mean, resolve this. Or are the circumstances just made it impossible to find a resolution here?
Well, we have a larger problem here. We have a larger problem here that there's a failure of the international community to care about Myanmar. There's a loss of political will within the international community to deal with Myanmar writ large. And that means that the Rohingya, who are the most prominent case of human rights abuses in Myanmar, are also being shoved aside.
Yeah.
The camps have essentially been pushed aside. The only Bangladesh is really pushing hard for resolution. The Arakan army takeover of Rakhine State has resulted in worse human rights abuses.
You know
There's
what?
now an OHCHR report that was just released.
Yeah, that's what I needed to ask you about that, Phil, because as far as the media is concerned and, the global attention, it had mostly been on, still is. It's been on talking about the Rohingya in terms of how Myanmar's military or its government had been dealing with the issues. And the truth is, it's become far more complicated over the last 9 years because of the civil war and specifically the role of the Arakan army, which basically controls Rakhine State. So do expand on that. What are their forces doing now, and how is that further harming the Rohingya, to ask it mildly?
Well, there's a scathing indictment against the Arakan army in the latest report, which shows that the Arakan army is using forced labor, human rights abuses, sexual abuses, issues related to restrictions of movement and livelihoods, forced disappearances. It's a litany of abuse. And the Rohingya who remain in Rakhine State are caught between a rock and a hard place, between the Myanmar military, which still controls Sittwe and one or two other districts, and the Arakan army, which controls everything else. And we're seeing now significant outflows of more Rohingya from Rakhine State to the Bangladesh camps. That means that situation in Rakhine is so bad that people are prepared to flee to try to seek safety in Bangladesh camps where there's not much safety. There's not much services or support. It's a desperate situation.
Yeah. Let me come back to Lucky then and ask about the state of Rakhine right now, because does the existence of the Arakan army alone mean that no repatriation would even be possible, even if the military junta were to be deposed?
Well, I guess we have to look at the issue in two different ways. And so when we talk about the repatriation of nearly 1.3 million refugees from Cox's Bazar back to their homes in Rakhine State, Myanmar, we have to look back beyond the Naf River, beyond the borders, inside the country, for those who remained in downtown areas of Mongdo, Butidong, Ratidong, and other parts of Rakhine State, are they really safe? Are they really protected? Do they have humanitarian aid? Do they have protection? And so I think that has to do a lot with those who are still in our own state remained. Their safety, security, making sure they have access to humanitarian aid. And I think the condition has to allow refugees from Cox's Bazar to be able to return back to Rakhine State. There has to be improvement to situation and condition inside Rakhine State before we even talk about repatriation for millions of refugees from Bangladesh, whether the land is under control of Arakan army or they're under control of military, who no longer exists almost in most part of Rakhine State anymore. More importantly, we also shouldn't forget the IDPs, the internally displaced people who are still inside Rakhine State, who should be allowed to go back to their homes without any condition and restrictions. So before we see all of those improvements inside Rakhine State, and there is a condition that will allow refugees to return back from Cox's Bazar, talking about repatriation is also premature for us. While the
Okay.
ultimate goal remains as finding a sustainable solution and a return back to our homes for millions of refugees from Cox's Bazar.
Aung Kyaw Moe, does that make sense to you? I mean, it seems unfathomable, really, to be talking about any sort of repatriation when it's still so dangerously unstable and militarized across the entire country. And we also are hearing some scattered reports that Bangladeshi security forces are potentially aiding armed groups in Myanmar against the better interests of the Rohingya population. Are you hearing the same as well?
The fundamental aspirations of the Rohingya remain to live safely, freely, with the dignity in their ancestral homeland in Myanmar, with citizenship, equal right, security, freedom of movement, access to education, livelihood, meaningful political participations. But we live in a new reality. The demography has changed, the territorial control has changed. It's not the same Rakhine that 9 years ago the Rohingya fled from. It is a new reality, and the new reality need to be accepted, and the Rohingya need to be adjusted to new circumstance, politically organized, to be ensuring becoming an agency of lead to change the conditions with the support of international community and neighbors. Of course, we appreciate Bangladesh for their generosity for hosting more than 1 million people who fled genocide from Myanmar. I think there is too little report that Bangladesh aiding. What Bangladesh wants, to our understanding, is stability in the border trade, to unload 1.3 million people from their shoulder, to be able to go back and end the cycle of departure of the Rohingya from their homeland and becoming a burden in Bangladesh, impacting several factors of the society, including economies, livelihoods, and the environment and etc. So it is in the interest of the Bangladesh to enable a conducive situations for the Rohingya to go back. And I think it would be too shallow to call on Bangladesh that it's aiding armed groups. If Bangladesh do that, Rohingya wouldn't be fleeing where they have fled from every day, and it's a daily reality. The key principle here is the choice. The Rohingya themselves belong to Rakhine State, and it's their homeland, and I'm one of those, and we will go back home. We don't need agreement of anyone who control or who does not control. Either it's Myanmar military or Arakan army, and we will have to walk in such a way that enable us to go back home with the safety, dignity, and our own will, and live peacefully there with other communities.
Phil, I couldn't tell if you had a comment there, especially when the issue of the Bangladeshi security forces were being addressed. If you do, go ahead.
I think that the issue of Bangladesh is exactly as Aung Kyaw Moe sets out, that they want to unburden themselves of the refugee camps, and they want to end the cycle of Rohingya fleeing to Bangladesh. The problem is that there's no security environment within Rakhine State that allows for any sort of return from Bangladesh of the Rohingya. It's just the bottom line reality that exists in Rakhine State, and the Arakan army seems to be making it worse. Now, the Arakan army continues to blame ARSA and other Rohingya militant groups. They say that they're trying to defend against those groups. The reality is that there is a big difference between what the Arakan army has and these Rohingya small groups.
Okay. When Aung Kyaw Moe was describing the new reality, when we talk of repatriation, is it true to say, as we've heard, that this displacement, mass displacement, has become permanent while the facilities remain temporary? And if that is true, how can that be sustained? When will something have to give?
Well, that's a great question about when things have to give, because it's completely unclear. But he is absolutely right to identify that issue, because Bangladesh wanted to have facilities exist for a year or two, and they have not upgraded facilities or improved situation for the Rohingya in the camps, in part because they don't want to give the Rohingya any sense that they'll be allowed to stay long term. The Rohingya don't want to stay long term. They want to return to Rakhine State. But, there's no political dynamic that is going on now at this time that indicates that there's a negotiation for the return of the Rohingya.
Right.
The Arakan army has fundamentally changed the situation on the ground in the Rakhine State with its military victories, its control of 14 out of 17 townships in Arakan State. And it seems like many others, including Beijing, have decided it's just a bridge too far. It's too difficult to try to negotiate some sort of solution in return for the Rohingya. And we're stuck. The international community has decided that the Rohingya dilemma is too difficult to solve, and overall that Myanmar is too difficult to solve. So the international community is looking away to other things. And ASEAN,
Okay.
which is tired of talking about Myanmar, is on the cusp of re-engaging without any significant improvement in the human rights situation. So
Okay.
we're almost back to square one.
Yeah. Lucky, it seems as far as the facilities are concerned, the only thing that did structurally change was that a number of refugees were moved from Cox's Bazar to Basan Char Island, whereby many of them tried to escape. And as for the case brought by the Gambia accusing Myanmar of genocide, the ICJ urged Myanmar to protect Rohingya. So is that the best that international justice can do, or are you expecting the process to eventually deliver more, for more infrastructure to be built, or to assist in resolving this ultimately? So where do you see it all going?
Well, the ICJ case in The Hague in Netherlands, for which after almost a decade, we had the first public hearing in January earlier this year, which was Gambia versus Myanmar, and which is one of the many steps on the legal proceeding and the trial process, which is pretty long, should be taken. However, we're expecting the judgment to be issued by the judges later in the year, around September, October. Say if it is positive, which we're hoping and praying for Gambia, which means Rohingya to win the case and the court start ruling. And yet, that piece of paper doesn't take the refugees from Cox's Bazar back to Burma immediately. It doesn't repatriate us. It doesn't change the ground realities pretty immediately. It doesn't hold even the military accountable overnight. And so the ground realities, the ground situation is almost still out of touch and almost overlooked a lot of the times. And so on a day-to-day basis of life, while people are, whether we call it refugees in Bangladesh or those remained in Rakhine State, or those the other have who are displaced in neighboring countries, their day-to-day life and the challenges that they continue to face still continue to get worse and worse for them.
Indeed.
On their
Okay.
day-to-day life. And so the legal proceeding is one of the milestones that will be, if it is positive for us, but then there's so much changes to be still made for people to ensure their protection, safety, security, and for a condition to allow us to go home.
Aung Kyaw Moe, let me give you 1 minute for your final thoughts.
I think the international community need to move from crisis management to political strategy. There must be a sustained pressure for accountability for the crimes committed against the Rohingya. Justice cannot be treated as an optional or secondary issue. I think second, international community should support political agency within the Rohingya community, the political solutions inside Myanmar that address the structural cause of this mass displacement, not simply try to negotiate another temporary humanitarian arrangement.
Okay.
The humanitarian assistance for refugees must continue, but I think what is lacking here is consistent political will and treat it as a political problem of Myanmar and enable Rohingya to fill the vacuum of the political organizations within themselves.
Okay.
If all the 30 or 40 plus people in Myanmar ethnic group are able to fight for their liberty, freedom in a politically organized way, so that Rohingya should for their own as well in any
Okay.
means that they can.
Aung Kyaw Moe, that will have to be the final
overall,
word, unfortunately, for this edition of the Newsmakers. We are completely out of time. I'd really like to thank all three of you so much for being with me and our viewers for joining us as well. Remember, you can follow us on social media and do be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.